So we're going to start this event tonight. First of all, welcome. This is Malta Scientific, the Earth and Us, Sustainable World. And today it's a different format, as you can see. We usually have our events at physically, right? We're usually at Spazio Creative. However, this is not an option. Well, actually, it is an option right now, but it hasn't been for some time. Since March, which unfortunately was when we had to stop our events. However, given that, we have Amik with us here today, who is going to be leading this event. And I'm going to introduce a little bit Amik, but also what the event is going to be on and what is going to happen as well. So for those of you who have never attended Malta Scientific events before, Malta Scientific is essentially a science cafe where we have a science topic and we discuss that scientific topic. I have been running this for quite some time now, and we usually have very interesting discussions. It is also part of the Malta Chamber of Scientists, and I would like to thank them from here because they made this event possible because of that it forms part of the Malta Chamber of Scientists. And of course, I would like to thank Amik and Edward and Chris as well. So let me tell you a little bit about Amik, who is going to host this event and lead this event tonight. So Amik currently works in the pharmaceutical industry, and she has previously worked in educational environments, both formal and informal, including Science in the City and the Malta National Aquarium. She has had an avid interest in sustainability since a young age, and this is why we're here tonight. And of course, this led to her following a degree, her master's in sustainability with Anglia Ruskin University. Her current interest is exploring the diversity of sustainability-related issues the Maltese population is dealing with, and this is what we will be discussing tonight. But I would also like to point out that we will have a panel of speakers. You can see them on your screens tonight, not in person. And then we will have a short discussion, but I'll let Amik do the talking from now on. One final thing, since she is doing this as part of her master's as well, I really encourage you to fill in her survey. She will be sending 2 surveys, okay, one now and one after. And for evaluation purposes, it's extremely important that you fill in both. But I'll let Amik do the talking from now on. So thank you very much, and I give the floor to Amik.
Hi, Daniel. Thank you for that wonderful introduction. So as mentioned, the survey can be found in the chat, and I would really appreciate if that is filled in as soon as you can. And this will be so I can get an idea of the perceptions before and after the talk about sustainability. Today, I'm very excited to introduce a diverse group of speakers from various walks of life, and they will be talking about how they have worked in sustainability and how they have engaged others in that aspect. But before that, I would like to introduce the concept of sustainability and why it's so complicated. So formally, the definition of sustainability is that we use resources without compromising the future generations. In plain terms, that means, we save resources for those coming after us. But due to lots of urbanization and various problems with the common good and various common resources, which are dwindling, there are lots of problems, especially with our natural environment. It's being degraded very rapidly, as you have noticed, and this also affects society and the economy. Everything is part of one bigger system, and it's like a car. If one major part stops working, then the rest of the system cannot work. And in turn, that jeopardizes not only our society, but to a greater extent, the entire global community as we know it. So to start off, I will be introducing the speakers. We have Sarah Gosroy, who has worked in various voluntary organizations and is currently working as a science communicator. We have Sarah Galea, who is also a science communicator and has developed educational learning programs with regards to sustainability. We have Dr. Mifsud, who has conducted vast amounts of research with regards to sustainability and the environment. And we also have Antoine Gatt, who very notably has conducted the LifeMed Green Roof project, which has caused a cascade effect of influence, not just on the University of Malta itself, but also on policymakers. So, Sarah Gosroy, the floor is yours for when you would like to begin. You have 10 minutes, and then the floor is of the rest of you, the audience, to ask as many questions as you like.
Okay.
So, Sarah?
Thank you very much, Amik. I hope everyone can hear me okay, and welcome. I'd like to welcome everyone here. So my journey into sustainability is quite informal in a way. I started when I was quite young, around 16, and I started with a project called Fish for Tomorrow, which the main aim was to promote sustainable fish consumption. And the idea of it was to go around asking people what their preference of fish was, and then creating a booklet which could highlight the different types of fish, when they're in season, and how they're caught. And with the idea of it being to promote, like, if you can choose a better type of fish, if you can consume differently, then that would help impact and reduce the impact of our fishing has. However, as the project prolonged and as we kept going through the process, I became very aware, and even my colleagues became very aware, that while the consumption is a problem, obviously, what the main environmental impact didn't come from the consuming of fish. I mean, there is a demand and there is a market for it, but it came from a lot of the big fisheries, the big companies, the trawling and the long lines, and all the methods in which the fish is collected. And a lot of the effort was being put into the consumption, but not into how the resource was being extracted, which is the main problem. And with fisheries, there's bycatch, there's a lot of issues, there's the leaving behind of nets. So there are a lot of environmental impacts on different sides, which you can change the way you consume something, but that doesn't make it sustainable. Like, you're removing a very small part of the issue there. And as I grew up and as I kept getting to learn more informally about sustainability, I started to realize that in most cases, it's the same in everything. So in terms of, for example, the fashion industry, again, the impact, the idea is very much on the individual. Like, how can you consume differently? How can your consumerism be changed in a way that you look at different companies that are more sustainable, that you look at materials which are more sustainable? I'm not trying to say that the individual doesn't have an impact, but realistically, you should be really looking at the top. In the fashion industry, such a rapacious industry, cannot guarantee their workers decent wages. They cannot guarantee their workers in a safe environment. The environment around the factories tends to be quite harmful and very unsustainable. So, and even now we're starting to see that even the sustainable brands are actually not as sustainable as they say they are. So when you look at sustainability, a lot of people talk about a holistic approach, but a lot of the effort in general, at the social media at least, is very much focused on the individual. How can you as an individual change your habits and become more sustainable? Which there is merit in. However, there is always this issue of you as an individual can have only so much as an impact. It's all about the numbers. And it's also quite elitist to ask someone who might have other social issues going on to buy, something which tends to be much more expensive. So one of the main things when talking about sustainability, as my colleagues will also discuss, is educating the people on how they can, yes, make better choices, but also looking at the top of how things start from the top, getting policy changes, it makes no difference for a person to recycle if at the top the processes aren't in place to have that being done. It makes no difference for someone to buy better clothing if at the top we're not actually putting systems and laws in place to guarantee that things are done in a sustainable manner. So my journey through sustainability has pushed me in a position where I'm now not just trying to improve my own consumers and improve my own methods, but also looking at how can I affect the very top. There's a saying that goes, you cannot break down the master's house with the same tools that were used. Sorry. So there's a saying that goes that you cannot break down the master's house with the same tools that were used to build it. And what we're saying now is a lot of the time, instead of fixing the system that's in place, there's a lot of creating of a new product, a new company, a new thing, as opposed to trying to fix what's already there. I think that's what the focus should be on. So thank you.
Introducing our next speaker, which will be Sarah Galea. If you can switch on your video, that will be much appreciated. Okay, great.
To do that.
Excuse me?
Because we're the host.
Okay. Do you prefer talking with video off?
It won't allow me to start my video. You have.
Hold on. How about now? Okay.
Yep, here I am. Hi guys.
Okay, great. So I will introduce you a bit. So Sarah, as I mentioned before, will be speaking about her experience in science communication and how a little conversation can go a long way in terms of engaging others in sustainability issues. So Sarah, the floor is all yours. And you can begin.
So hello. Okay, so I think there's a bit of a lag. I hope you guys can hear me. It's nice to see so many of you, but not to see your faces. It's a bit sad. So as Amik very nicely said, I'm Sarah. I'm a science communicator, but I also work as a program developer at Esplora. My journey of sustainability is also a bit more informal, like the other Sarah mentioned, who's also a good friend of mine. I studied biology and chemistry at university, but to be honest, while learning so much about ecosystems and how the world works, I never was as excited to do something so that I have, like, there's more of an effect on being able to be more sustainable and influencing other people to make certain choices. And it started as a slow process. There's been a nice change dynamic across the internet and throughout the world, and people being more active and well spoken about this. And in my case, during that time, I was learning how to become a science communicator. So I got to meet a lot of kids, a lot of adults, a lot of families, and we started having conversations about certain decisions we make and how we can make the world a better place. To learning a bit more about how we could do that, about what we can do as a community, or that we don't know exactly how a bee might affect available to us. So one of the journeys which we took, myself with Greenhouse as well, an NGO I work for, was to develop a shadow puppet show about that, to teach all sorts of ages about the process of pollination, using a form of art and using conversations we had with young kids and families during Science in the City. We could discuss how such a small insect could make such a big difference in the lives of our day-to-day. One other thing which I, as Amik said, was conversations I've had. So I've been very lucky that through my job I've learned a lot of things. So I've learned how to chat with any human that I meet. And it's been a nice journey of learning how to speak to anyone in the world about science at very different levels. So with my background and learning from other people around me, I've been able to have very interesting conversations across Malta. Like I've talked to gardeners who love taking care of their gardens and talked about how il-hashish hazin, the bad weeds, are sometimes a very good thing, and talking about how they make a difference in food availability for insects around the world. And it's been a nice conversation. I think that starting conversations about these small things that we can do open up the world so that people can make better decisions in the long term, and also prioritize these things, not just something that a government needs to take care of, but rather it could have such a... Okay, Amik has stopped my video. I don't know if she wants you to keep speaking because my voice might be lagging.
Yes, please keep on speaking. Just, I think without video, it might work better.
No worries, no worries.
I'd like to hear your voice.
Okay, what else? With regards to sustainability, I think there's a lot that has to be done. I also want to learn more, just like anyone else here, I think, who's here is always actively wanting to learn more. I like reading about these things. Things are always changing, but I feel that it's a crucial time that we make certain decisions. Like the younger generation are so inclined and so aware of what's happening, it was a very nice and refreshing insight when I had workshops with very young kids, 8 and 9-year-olds, and they were teaching me. They wanted to tell me what they do to help save the planet. I know that sometimes it feels like, you know, it's just one person, but it starts from there. It starts from actually caring enough to do something every day. And then as a community, we could actually make decisions that prioritize taking care of our planet rather than just, you know, moving forward. As Sarah very nicely put, like using the same tools that got us here might not be the best idea to actually achieve such goals. So we need to together reinvent a bit those tools and see where that gets us. That's it from my end. Thank you, Amik.
Okay, thank you. So next up on the list is Dr. Mifsud. I will start your video now, if that's okay. There you are. So as mentioned before, Dr. Mifsud has done countless amounts of research on the topic of sustainability and environmental science. And I am very excited and curious as to what this research is all about. Dr. Mifsud, the floor is all yours. And you are muted.
All right, so Mark, I come from the university. I've been at the university for quite a number of years now. I coordinate a master's degree in education for sustainable development. And my interest is basically how education weaves into sustainability and how we can actually influence behavior now of people through education. I prepared a couple of slides. I don't know if I am able to share the screen. I'll try.
Yes, you are. I encourage everyone who would like to see the slides to put your view as speaker view.
Okay, can you just confirm if there is the screen available?
It says that you have started screen sharing.
So it's taking too long.
No, here it is.
Okay, well, I'll just go through a few slides, maybe 5 or 6 slides, just to give you an indication. Well, some of the slides, some of the speakers have already talked a little bit about, so I just will go quickly through them. So as you know, the Earth is facing a huge amount of environmental issues and challenges. I won't just go through them, but I mean, all of you know about them, but obviously it's not just environmental issues, it's also social issues. For example, there's an unequal distribution of resources. There's quite a lot of poverty on our planet. There are economic issues. There is not only environmental issues. There's also a number of cultural issues. But you know all about this probably, so I'll just move on. You know, then we start with the concept of sustainable development, which Amik already mentioned. And usually most people mention the Brundtland Commission and the definition, which basically goes through that what we do today will affect the next generation, and we cannot leave a planet which is worse off. And basically that's what we're doing. And usually discuss sustainable development as a series of a number of circles. Traditionally it was 3. So there's the environment, there's society, and there's the economy, and they are all of equal importance. So for something to be sustainable, it has to ensure that the 3 of them will result in an improvement. Nowadays, we're also adding culture, and there are many other pillars, a number of other pillars that are sometimes discussed, but UNESCO accepts culture as obviously it gives that sense of belonging, and you won't be interested in protecting the environment if you don't own it, you don't feel that it's part of you. So culture is important. I mean, it goes against what's happening now through globalization, etc., etc. Obviously, there are many initiatives that are necessary for sustainable development. I won't go through them all, like legislation, economic initiatives. You know, you have to rule out corruption, for example. But I'm going back now, Agenda 21, which is basically now nearly as old as I am, or a little bit older, hopefully. But, you know, during the Earth Summit in Rio de Janeiro, they came up with Agenda 21, which is an agenda for the 21st century, and it contains 36 chapters. And one of the chapters identified to try to achieve sustainable development was basically education, public awareness, and training. And that's where I mostly focus on in my work. Understandably, there are some issues, for example, that even most of the people that have the highest ecological footprint are those people that have PhDs and MBAs, believe it or not. So it's quite interesting, obviously, and business people. But education-wise, you know, people that have MBAs, etc., appear to have a huge amount of ecological footprint. I don't know if I have another 2 minutes, such I would go into another couple of slides.
Oh, you're well on time.
Okay, sorry, I spoke. Okay, so basically what we think should occur is that we should reorient education in the sense that, you know, most of our educational systems are basically tackling problems that were present before the current issues are, you know, we don't have a lot of education in the primary and in the secondary, which is where we should basically put our guns. That focuses on, for example, climate change, or, you know, things have improved a lot, but we still have a lot to improve. It's not just obviously formal education, but that's where a lot of work should be done. It's also informal education and non-formal education. Well, what is ESD? What is education for sustainable development? Well, you know, previously there was a lot of studies, especially coming from America, that said that if you increase the amount of knowledge of people or students or children, well, that will result in an increase in their positive attitude towards the environment, and that will result in more positive environmental behavior. Well, unfortunately, research has proven this to be untrue. In fact, just to give you a very simple example, you know, a lot of hunters have a huge amount of knowledge about birds, but probably their behavior towards birds is not very pro. Let's keep it. So unfortunately, that is not ESD, you know, it's not that simple. And something else, that education for sustainable development is not teaching about nature, because as you notice, sustainability is much, much, much more complex than that. It also includes people, it also includes the economy, it includes culture, etc., etc. So what is education for sustainable development? Well, what we aim for is basically to help citizens, to become active and sustainable citizens, and they make decisions that are good for the, good for the planet, basically, and to have a peaceful society, and to have a just society, and to have a society which can live, let's say, in harmony with nature, etc., etc., within its sustainable limits. Okay, there are a number of guiding principles. I won't go into them, but I will just give you a last slide, because these are the guiding principles that we usually go through. I'll just give you a last slide, which is this. Most ESD in Malta started with the work of NGOs. Obviously, they focused mostly on nature conservation, but they did have an impact, obviously. But now things are becoming much more holistic. We are encompassing not only protecting nature, but other issues of sustainability. There are three things which kept ESD in through research. We know that ESD has progressed slowly, and I'll stop with this slide, in Malta, because of three main reasons. One of them is the highly competitive Maltese educational system, which basically means that, research has found that, for example, you become much more attached to nature if you actually are outside, you do field work, you do field visits, etc., etc. But the Maltese educational system means that you have to stay inside to, study for exams, and it's a little bit difficult to go out of doors if you're a teacher, because obviously parents would want you to do rote learning and etc., etc., with their children, so they are prepared for the exam. So unfortunately, because it's so highly competitive, the Maltese educational system has tended not to allow ESD to happen, and obviously going out is one of them. And there's also an issue of colonial mentality here, in the sense that colonialism means that the land is not yours; it's controlled by the people who are colonizing the land. And our colonial mentality means that a lot of Maltese, now I'm obviously generalizing, but I have to do this in just 30 seconds. A lot of Maltese care a lot about their homes, but not so much about the outside, in the sense that they care a lot about their homes being clean and everything being okay, but then outside, it's another issue, because it's of the colonizers. Also have a problem with leadership, because we were used to being led by the colonizers. So we have that attitude, when the prime minister goes on a bicycle, I will go on the bicycle, let them do it first. And that comes mostly from a colonial mentality. There were quite a lot of studies, including not only in Malta but also in India and other places that were colonized, and this is quite common in a number of these areas. And also there's an issue of transferability of practice, in the sense that because our last colonizers were the English, we tend to use their methods, and obviously you cannot, there's a totally different context, and their methods may not be always usable. And lastly, also politics is an issue. Why? Because education is long-term, and politicians want to have, very, very quick results, especially before the next election. So, their project, it's their baby, and they can cut the ribbon and get that's what politics is all about. But unfortunately, education is different than that. It's easier to build a school and open it in one legislature than change the education system, the attitudes of the children, by putting in a proper ESD program, because the result will be apparent in 15 years time. Okay, so probably that's one of the reasons. These are some of the reasons why ESD was very slow to grow in Malta. And I'll stop here because I took a lot of your time. So I hope you saw some of the slides. So
Thank you very, very much, Mark. So
did you see most of the slides or not?
Yes, we did.
Okay, thanks. That's good.
Very clearly. I will just stop screen
I remove
sharing.
the screen sharing now.
Yes, please.
Okay,
brilliant.
Thank you.
Next up on our list, the fourth and final speaker is Antoine Gatt. Now, Antoine has done a very special project which has to do with green roofs. And this special project, known as LifeMed Green Roof, is found in the University of Malta. Antoine, the floor is yours, and you can begin.
Thank you very much. Well done event. So yes, I would like to just give an extension to my introduction. I'm a landscape architect by profession, and this didn't just happen like this. It happened because I was into, or I still am into, the environment, and I wanted to contribute to society, realizing that we are heading towards the edge of a precipice, practically, the way I see it, with all this how would you say, development going on, because this obviously has been going on for quite some time. But what I've seen is that as a landscape architect, I could make some difference in the way I do things, because I obviously have to discuss issues and projects with people, and I'm able to somehow influence what happens on the land, directly on the land. Because what I think is the problem is that people think that they are distinct from nature, considering the fact that people live in cities nowadays. I mean, we all know, I hope, or I imagine that more than half the population of the world live in cities. People now think that they are distinct from nature, and so they've got this false impression, which unfortunately is taking us into a vicious cycle. The fact that even children, as Mark said very well, children are not exposed to nature. So obviously, if children are not exposed to nature, then obviously they are not going to feel anything, and there isn't this connection with nature. So the worrying thing is that in future, who is going to fight for nature, practically? But many people do not realize, as far as I'm concerned, that everything comes from nature. Our food, our clothing, even the plastic that we use to build our computers, our furniture, everything comes from nature. And without nature, our quality of life would not fare well. And quality of life is something which interests me very much as a landscape architect, as a professional, because we are seeing that the quality of life in urban areas is rapidly decreasing. And if you look at going back to children again, we see even the elderly, for example, we see a lot of illnesses. We're seeing a lot of psychological illnesses which weren't present some years back, 20, 25, 30 years back. There are loads of respiratory illnesses, and all these are linked to our environment. Our environment, as in a general terms, not just the trees and the bees, okay, but the fact that we're living in an urban environment which is devoid of nature. And very few of us apparently realize that nature is important for our well-being, because people tend to feel better when they are in contact with nature. And we're seeing a trend where people are constantly moving away from this situation. And this is what led me to green roofs, to this LifeMed green roof project Amik has mentioned. What happened was that some years back, I was, well, a few years back, quite a few years back now, in Monaco, and I happened to see all these green roofs, and it dawned on me that, listen, we could do the same thing in Malta, you know. The fact that we've got flat-roofed buildings, the fact that our gardens are being destroyed and our urban areas are becoming more compact and dense, you know. So practically we came up with this project, and the aim of this project was to make a change in the way we design our urban area. The problem was that there was mentality, there is still this mentality to a certain extent, where people think that nothing can grow because we are living in a semi-arid, or rather now it's a semi-arid, an arid environment. But I think people do not realize that nature finds its way and adapts to the situation. So we have a lot of plants which are able to withstand this, this arid or semi-arid environment. So this, this project, the LifeMath Green Roof project, aimed at creating a baseline study for, to make it possible rather for people to actually construct green roofs on their dwellings or on any structure which is able to take the weight of the green roof system. The biggest challenge obviously was convincing people, but that was sorted out by the construction or the installation of a demonstration green roof, which wasn't that much of a problem. We allocated a space at university, we constructed this, this green roof, people came, they liked it, you know, but there was something else. There was another problem, which was how does it perform? And the thing is, when somebody mentioned it previously to me, that people are very hesitant to try something new. And there are two ways of going about convincing people to do things. It's either through education or through demonstration. Okay. So what we did was, apart from the demonstration green roof, we even started pushing politicians and the political sphere, the policymakers, you know, at trying to introduce green roofs to into the system. The project ran from 2013 to 2017, and we are in 2020 at the moment. Okay, so there has been it's quite at least 3 years have passed since we completed our project, but we have seen a bit of a difference. We have politicians now, or ministers and policymakers are talking about green roofs, about green infrastructure to a certain extent, how we can actually start implementing green infrastructure within our urban areas. And this is good because it's a chicken and egg issue. It's either the politicians make their move, you know, and they start pushing the introduction of green roofs into the system, or through education, whereby you educate people and eventually the people will ask for help or assistance in creating these green roofs. And this I've seen the education aspect at least, and the way it works. I've seen years back when I used to work for the environment department, and there was a huge education campaign. People my age or slightly younger remember Shumimu, for example. All right, and I've seen firsthand the power of education. I remember seeing or hearing rather a student, not more than 10 years, scolding his mother because she threw a paper on the floor. Okay, and that was the fruit of education, practically. So yes, these two fronts are very important: education and policy making. And this, I think, will take me to my last point. We're speaking about sustainability. We're speaking about the need to introduce nature into our urban areas for sustainability. But at the end of it all, I think there is what we call social justice. Environment sustainability, rather, and environmentalism is all about social justice. And for me personally, I think it became quite clear during the current lockdown, all right, where you had people who were able to live in luxurious buildings or dwellings, with gardens, who fared far more better than those who were living in small apartments without any yards or gardens, just a balcony, okay? And no good view or nice view to look at in the street, because our streets are quite barren of any green infrastructure. So if we start on this social justice issue, I think we can discuss that all night. But I think I will stop here. And as I said, it's not just about the environment, the birds and the flowers. It's about our quality of life. And finally, it's all about social justice. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much, Antoine. Now, as a heads up to the audience, if you want to ask questions, you can either switch on your videos and raise your hands, or you can also write your questions in the chat box if you feel much better asking questions that way. Anything goes. I will ask the speakers to switch on their videos. So that's one. Okay, brilliant. And I have quite a few questions myself, so I will start with one. So, Antoine, you just mentioned the reality of social injustice. To the other speakers, Sarah, Galea, and Dr. Mifsud, how have you experienced how social injustice affects sustainability from your perspective? Who would like to start? Okay, Sarah Galea. Okay.
I hope it's not lagging too much.
No.
From my case, I think from a personal experience sort of thing, I think social injustice has a very big effect on, when you think about sustainability, most people think about, as Antoine was saying, sort of nature and stuff like that. And if you already are being forced to have a sort of lifestyle through your social position in life that is very busy, that doesn't allow you to even have time to, prioritize other things except, surviving in a certain extent. These things don't come, like doing something for the planet is the last thing on your mind, and it's not your fault for that to happen, because it's not a priority. Like surviving is a priority. So certain social injustices have left a very big part of the population struggling and not being a part of this conversation, which could possibly also affect their lives in the long term. Because as we're learning now, I can't speak a lot for Malta, but like when I'm hearing about America and certain minority groups, when you think about it, like if there's air pollution, certain air pollution is around those kind of suburbs which are filled with minorities. So there are certain things which happen through the system which impact a lot more people who don't usually take part in these kind of discussions, but actually are impacted by them. That's my personal observation of what might happen. I'm sure everyone else has other things to add.
That's very insightful. Sarah or Dr. Mifsud, would you like to contribute? Okay, Sarah.
Yeah, I'm very glad that Antoine brought this up, because social injustice is a huge part of sustainability. The idea of sustainability cannot happen without social injustice. And in many cases, the poorer people, and even as Dr. Mifsud mentioned, are the ones who struggle the most and have a lot of the impact, a lot of the guilt is being put on them. We hear videos being shared of rivers being polluted, and we look at that and we think like, oh, why don't they do better? Why don't they learn? And then you find out that it has something to do with how Europe ships off its recyclable material to other countries. So the people there who are separating the recycled material actually don't contribute to that, but are the ones being put the blame on. So social injustice is a big part of sustainability. And the way And as Antoine said, like even now during the whole coronavirus pandemic, when you look at how people were living for the most part, they were doing the bare minimum in terms of their own impact to a certain extent, and it still wasn't enough. So it's not just, it has to really be a community kind of approach towards something. It's not the individual on its own.
Well, that's very interesting, and it's all true. Dr. Mifsud, do you have any insight on this?
I think a lot of points were actually covered by the previous speakers, in the sense that, you know, usually land uses that are associated with you know, unwanted land uses eventually end up in communities which are poor, in the sense that if you're going to build an incinerator, or you're going to build any other machine or industry that's going to pollute, usually it's located in areas in which there are poor neighborhoods. This happens globally, and even in Malta. In fact, for example, in America, there were some studies on landfill sites, and most of the landfill sites were found mostly close to Black communities, which is quite revealing. It's also interesting what Sarah mentioned, in the sense that that it's also what we learn at school, in the sense, you know, if you are coming from a rich family, it's much easier for you to take, you know, to go out in a supermarket and buy, for example, organic produce or anything which is, you know, more, I don't know, dolphin friendly, because usually they cost a little bit more. And for people who are at the borderline, for them it's more about survival. It's you know, they go and buy the cheapest product possible. You know, I tell my students, for example, I put them in a sort of dilemma. I tell them, let's say that your family is you know, is dying from hunger, and you know, you live in China, and you see a panda. What would you do? You know, you'd leave your family die, or you'd kill the panda. You know, sometimes for some people, and I used, for example, to teach a new one there in Cameroon. For some people, for us, it's easy to criticize them while we're on, you know, a sofa and just discussing. But for them, when they have their back on the wall, it's not there. They don't really have a choice. You know, they don't really have a choice. In our eyes, maybe they make the wrong choice, but they don't really have a choice to do the right thing. And maybe education is a tool that can help them to you know, get out from this problem. Some of them don't have a choice, and they do what they shouldn't do, but they don't have a choice. So, and that's a big injustice, you know, because we do have a choice, and we usually choose the wrong, which we sometimes, let's say, sometimes choose the wrong, we make the wrong decision, but they don't have a choice, which is much worse. They can't do any, they can't take any decision. So
yes, of course. Antoine, do you have an interjection?
Just a small point to what has been said. We have to even keep in mind that these issues we're talking about happen in Malta, because I think a lot of people have this impression that, yes, you know, climate change, social injustice, you know, it's happening out there. But very few, I think, people realize that we're living it ourselves in Malta, you know. I think we're considering that many of us live comfortably, or let's say they think they live comfortably or healthy, you know. We tend to forget that we are in it as well.
Well, very insightful. Now, we have a question from Daniel Said-Policino for Dr. Mifsud and Antoine. Hello, Daniel.
Hi, good evening. Thank you for this nice evening. It's very interesting. Yes, both Mark and Antoine have spoken about the importance of education in sustainable development. I work as a professor in soil science, so I study soil, and my work gets me very in close contact with farmers. So I feel that most of our outreach to farmers is some form of education. So we try to promote the adoption of sustainable techniques. And my experience shows that the adoption of sustainability is very much linked to the livelihoods of farmers. So sometimes you propose something which is going to reduce their livelihood, so the amount of income they're going to get. So my question is this: how much does is the effectiveness of education depending on policies at the end of the line?
I don't know if you're asking me or someone else.
Yeah, you both spoke about it. So, and you both.
Okay. Well. Actually, I have some experience with fishermen livelihoods. We're currently, there was a project. There were going to be some new marine protected areas in the surrounding Maltese Islands, and obviously we had to do a livelihood analysis to check how the fishermen, the divers, and all the other schools, for example, diving schools and the sea boats, the speed boats, and all the touristic activities would be influenced. Obviously, the most vocal group were the fishermen, so we did focus groups with them. Usually, it's not easy at all, in the sense that fishermen were very, very much against this for a number of reasons. First of all, they said that, for example, the current marine protected areas are just protected areas on paper. So there's no real enforcement. And secondly, they also thought that being everywhere with marine protected areas will obviously impact their livelihoods. So where does education come in? Well, obviously, it had to be made clear to fishermen that marine protected areas do not disallow fishing totally. And in fact, you'd have to try to use case studies and try to show them that in areas where there was marine protected areas introduced in other countries around the world, in a proper way, well, actually the number of fish increased, because there were areas which were considered to be nurseries in which the fishermen were not allowed to fish, while other areas the fishermen were allowed to fish. Also, and in addition to that, there was what we call alternative livelihood, in the sense that the fishermen were also educated in the sense that they could do something else with their experience, with their fishing vessel, etc., etc. And what they did, for example, was try to have something to do with tourism and take tourists on the boats on fishing tours, and not fishing tours in the sense of the normal fishing tours, you go with fishing, but actually experiencing what they experience when they go fishing for example, 3 days. It's not easy, but I think education provided at least a sort of a roadmap on which, fishermen can try to understand that, these changes may not totally kill or annihilate their job, but it may be helpful for them in the long term. And it can also open up new avenues for other sources of income. But we had to communicate a lot with them. And one of the issues also was the way we had to communicate, in the sense they have to be, the language used and the way we have to talk to fishermen who are feeling that they are being threatened, that their job is being threatened. We had to be, it wasn't easy at all. I don't think it was totally successful, but I think that, it's a start, it's a start.
Antoine?
I agree totally what Mark was saying, because I've experienced that even with farmers years back. But something else, the problem with education is generally time. It takes a lot of time for people to take in what you're telling them, the information you're giving them, and then they sort of think about it, and then they decide. So that is something, as I said, it takes time, but it is very effective, especially if you target the younger generations. But I think what is very important, and I see that in our, for example, the LifeMed Green Roof project, and I'll tell you another experience I had, is demonstration. If you're able to show people the benefits that you would get through something in particular, okay, so in this case it was the green roof. We created a green roof. We showed people that you can reduce air conditioning by, I don't know, 48%. You can actually grow plants, in 15 centimeters of substrate. You don't need a hell of a lot of water, you know, with less than a liter a week per plant, you are able to keep the plants going throughout the arid season, you know. But this demonstration aspect is very important. And the thing is, people are afraid of change. And this is where my other experience came years back. The same people my age or slightly younger maybe would remember Ramla al-Hamra and the kiosks on the sand dunes. Okay, at the time I used to work with the environment department, and we decided we wanted to get them out of there. And we had a lot of opposition, but we kept on going. We literally moved them to their current place. Okay, and today those people fare well, you know. They wouldn't move from there because they have a lot of benefits. Previously, to go and restock, they had to get trucks and excavators to move the equipment and whatnot. Nowadays, they're very comfortable. But it was, at that point, wasn't education, but then it was enforcement, you know, and showing them what can be done through good design and good practice. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Antoine and Mark. We have a question from Danielle. Danielle, would you like to speak?
Yes, thank you, Amik. First of all, it's a very interesting discussion, and I have a lot of questions, but I'll just say one question for now. So my question is, has there been local research about whether the perception, the attitudes, and the behavior of multi-citizens has improved when it comes to sustainability? And if so, what are some of the results?
So who would like to start first?
I don't know if there's been anything specific. Maybe I know that Dr. Mark has some things about.
Yeah, I think I have a problem. However, I don't know if I'm okay. Are you seeing me?
Yes.
Something happened to my screen here.
You're still there.
We're still seeing you.
Yes. All right. Well, I did some studies. I did some study mainly on youth, and I think my first study was published in 2011. And basically, they were 16 to 20-year-olds, I think. What we found out was that they have, with regard, you know, the studies are basically what we do is we do studies on environmental knowledge, and we usually do a very simple questionnaire, which we try to take the format of some other international studies for comparison's sake, and sometimes it was obviously in projects and we use the same type of questionnaire. But this particular knowledge questionnaire had, I think, 24 questions, and you know, they were divided into 4 separate categories, one of which was local environmental issues, one of which was global, etc., etc. And then we do an attitude scale. We measure attitudes with a Likert scale, which has five categories, and we do a behavior scale. So we end up with 3 different scores for each person. I did this about 10 years ago, and we're doing it now again. For example, one of the things that crops up is that first of all, the knowledge is average, but what we know is that usually youth know more about global environmental problems than the Maltese ones, and this is usually associated with the fact that they are a lot exposed to, you know, to the internet and to the TV. And well, TV now is dead. After the second study, they're not following it anymore. But 10 years before, it was still there. So they're exposed mostly to the global issues, and they know more about them. So when they answer in the knowledge section, they know a lot about global issues, but much less about the local ones, which is quite interesting because they're quite close to the Maltese problems, but yet they know more about the global ones. Attitudes are usually very positive because they don't cost anything, in the sense that attitudes are attitudes are usually quite positive. while behavior is usually not that positive, in the sense that attitude statements are, you know, do you agree with bird hunting? It doesn't cost anything. You say no, or you say yes. But then if you say behavior, you know, do you go for a protest, for example? Do you go and use your time to you know, to do an objection at the planning authority? That's different. It's behavior. It requires more effort, and usually it's much less. So what has changed, however, now is that after 10 years, most of these things actually stay the same, but the detachment, you know, there is two feelings have emerged now. One is the feeling of detachment, especially in the younger generation. They are totally being detached from nature, totally being detached. That most of the time they're passing most of their time playing online games. The outing, the normal outing, let's say normal, but the outing to the, you know, busquet and to natural areas, which was something which was quite something which is done in the family, which was more common 10 years ago. It's much less common now. And a lot of students now are feeling very much detached. And they're also feeling there is a huge amount of, let's say, a feeling of hopelessness, that they feel that, you know, it's unfortunate, but a lot of them are feeling that there's not much that we can do now, you know, which, you know, qed jaqtaw qalbhom, ġifieri, you know, żgħażagħ qed jaqtaw qalbhom. I mean, ma tihomx tort, so, you know, it is an issue, ġifieri, but these studies show that there is some light, let's say some positive aspects, in the sense that there are a few students have become maybe more vociferous, and you know, and they have principles, and they are ready to talk about them more, etc., etc. But the situation, I think, with regards at least to youth, generally speaking, because as I told you, there are some pockets that are improving, but generally speaking, we're not getting any better. We're not getting any better. That's. I mean, maybe someone else can talk, because then we do studies on different sectors of the population, and there's also obviously the Eurobarometer studies, which are done by the European Union, but the ones that we do here, well, they don't compare, let's say, unfavorably with other studies around the world. So it's something which is not only in Malta, but it's happening in quite a lot of countries. So this detachment from nature is something that can be encountered in a number of other studies. I mean, even in the UK and in Poland, for example. In fact, I was involved in a project with BirdLife, and we're trying to do a project called LLN, Lifelong Learning Through Nature. And we did a lot of studies with students and tried to find the best type of fieldwork that would be effective with students, etc., etc. And probably one of the most effective would be, if it's not just a day, but it's the usual, the older type of the Villa Poseidon, if some of you remember, in which we used to stay for a couple of days. They seem to be much more effective at changing behaviors, etc., etc. But now it's a little bit more difficult for teachers to do that because of, you know, ethical issues, parent consent forms, and so on and so forth. What we also found is that the effectiveness of these outings, etc., decrease gradually, and they're all statistically significant with age. So if you really want to have an effect on the new generation, you have to really go at the really primary starters, you know, the really early years.
That's very, very interesting.
Extremely. Does anyone else have a contribution to this question? Sarah, and Antoine after Sarah. So, Sarah, the floor is yours.
I'd like to continue what Mark was saying, to offer a bit of hope in the pockets of resistance, I suppose. One of the things, like the Greenhouse NGO I work with, is doing a lot of citizen science projects. And within that, so the idea is that there's a lot of data that needs to be collected about various species. And so as a scientist, you can't do that on your own. You require a lot of people on the ground, essentially. And through that effort, we're seeing, at least I'm saying, certain youths that are coming to the meetings or coming to the trainings, they're saying, and they don't necessarily have a background. So that's what a citizen science is. It's a lay person. It could also be someone with a background, but generally lay people who show up and just learn to go to certain trainings and then learn to use certain tools to collect data. And through those trainings, it's becoming quite evident that lots of people are starting to realize how dire the situation is, And maybe instead of being pushed towards hopelessness or being pushed towards like, all right, let's become active, let's do something. What can I do? And we have 2 tree projects we're working on now, one about orchids and one with bats. And in both projects, there's quite a bit of activity in them. And within that, you also create community, as Antoine had said. You create a sense of like there's a group, we're all working together, and like we're all working for our own betterment, for our own environment. So yes, there are, I'm sure what Mark said is true, that generally the population is apathetic, I suppose, but there are these small pockets of resistance. One of the things to mention about the apathy and the increase in apathy is the movement in the standard. So my parents' generation would have experienced a very different environment to what I have experienced. In the past 10 years, we've seen a lot more development than there has been before. And Antoine also mentioned corruption, and that plays a huge role in like your own attitude towards something. You cannot feel hopeful that things are going to change if there are laws in place, but there is no enforcement, or they're not adhered to in the right way. The corruption is also another big point in having hope.
That is really true. Antoine.
Just tidbits here and there, because to substantiate what Mark was saying. I had experience, for example, when I teach at university and I have architecture students, and this is a bit worrying as well. When you ask them how many times a month do you go into the countryside, for example, most of them don't. And only a few go, I mean, out of a class of, I don't know, 60, you would have a handful of them who go out once a week, maybe. All right, which is very worrying, as I was saying, and as we are saying now, because these are the people who are going to be our policymakers in the future. These are the people who are supposed to be the champions of the environment, and when you hear children of a young age not knowing what a snail is, or who has never seen thyme or smelled thyme, it becomes quite worrying. I think if I had to look at myself, my urge towards protecting the environment comes from my childhood. I used to live in an area which was practically fields. Nowadays it's all built up because that was in Birkirkara at Taparis, and we used to run around in the fields, and play in the fields and enjoy the flowers. And this is something which stuck to me, because these are experiences that children go through, and it stimulates their senses. And these stimuli will keep on chasing you up till you die, and they are very important for your mental well-being. All right. So considering the fact that kids do not have these stimuli, means that there will be something wrong eventually as they develop and they will grow. They will be missing these things which are important, especially when they grow older. I'll stop here though.
Thank you, Antoine. Now we have another question from another user who has asked, let me find a question. Which countries have solved these sustainability issues the best, and how did they do it? This does not apply to any specific problem, just almost all the problems. It's a very open-ended question. However, I think there will be a lot of answers for this. Who would like to start?
Well, I don't think anybody has ever solved the sustainability issues. It's a matter of mentality. So I think people or countries with a general mentality of sustainability are moving in one direction, and they think before they act. So the way they do things are generally considerate towards environmental issues. Others are not. But we can never be totally sustainable, I think, because people use materials, raw materials, and these have obviously impacts, if not within their own confines or within their own boundaries, in other people's or in different countries, say.
Okay, so to elaborate on the reader's question, he has also written that, in his opinion, most of these solutions are mostly focused on re-education and social and collective responsibility. So, in your experiences, are there any solutions which involve the economy more, for example?
I don't know if it's a solution, but there's been a lot of initiatives in talking a bit more about a circular economy. And actually, like, if you develop something, you think about the whole process as a closed system. So these days, as Antoine was saying, sort of, if you take a raw material, you're not necessarily responsible of whatever you use it for, or how you clean the raw material or anything. Like, sometimes there's not enough responsibility given at the end of the process. Sort of, you use it, but you don't have a price to pay. So there's been discussions about circular economy and designing things which feed each other and do not harm the environment. There's also, this is a bit not the nicest, but there's eco taxes, so that but it's a good idea, because sometimes these the taking of resources is not given as much value as it should be, because technically water is for everyone, right? It's on this planet for us all. It's not something that should be monetized, but it is to a certain extent, and it has been allowed to be, like, there's a price on it, and it's taken from one place and someone else is using it. So these kind of shortcomings where certain materials which exist on this planet are not given as much value lead to a lot of social injustices. So whoever can take that water can put a price on it, which the people living right next to it can't afford to actually, have the water to drink. So there's these balances which need to start getting the right enforcement of laws to make sure that these inequalities don't take place, I think.
I think that's it is very true and very insightful. Sarah, Ghose, and Antoine, and Mark, do you have any contributions to this question?
What mean?
I was going to add that I don't know of any country which is like doing this perfectly, but there's been stories of nice, as in, for example, noticing trends in kindergartens, like Dr. Mifsud mentioned. It has a very big impact when you start kids when they're young. So there's been a lot of nice initiatives across the world where, from a kindergarten age, part of their education is about living holistically with this planet. So as they're learning about colors and as they're deciding how to separate, blocks from circles or stuff like that, they're also learning why they recycle, why they choose one food instead of another one, because it has less impact on the planet. And it's become sort of a holistic part of their growing up. And obviously, again, we're talking about social injustice, so not every kid is exposed to this. There's also, these kind of, it would be nice if every kid had to grow up learning about these things and it being a part of themselves. But there's initiatives which are happening and will hopefully start infiltrating in our systems as well, hopefully, to get a bit more. I think while the kids are learning, the parents learn too, because I think that's the most crucial time, where the parents are sort of deciding that they want a better world for their kids, which are still very young, and they want to leave them with a planet which they might not be so happy with. So I think it's a twofold, if not like a multifold effect, if we could teach the young ones, parents, and it's a whole community around them. We'll see.
Thank you, Sarah. So we have, sorry. Oh, excuse me. Yes.
I would say that there are some countries which I mean, no country is perfect, obviously, but I am inspired by quite a number of countries. For example, the ones in the Scandinavian region, like Sweden and Finland. Obviously, the context helps them. They have, hydroelectric power because they have so much water. For example, Norway has too much water, one would say, and they have large land mass, and they have so many trees, and they have so many resources and per capita. So maybe the context helps them, but their mentality, and even from the young schooling age, even Japanese schools do this. For example, they have a session of tree hugging. It's a very simple thing, you hug a tree and you smell the tree and you feel the texture of the tree. And a lot of studies indicate that this really has an effect. There is a lot of work done by a tanner on significant life experiences, LSCs. And, it's just like, I don't know if you ever heard of Natalino Fenech, for example. He is a very well-known anti-hunting person. But maybe you didn't know that he was a hunter. And he wrote Fatal Flight, and he wrote a number of books about, bird hunting, etc., etc. And he changed his he had what we call a significant life experience. What happened to him was that he was hunting with his uncle, and they didn't take the dogs with them to get the birds back. And his uncle shot a bird. And when he went to collect this bird was vomiting blood. And that experience totally changed this person, So it's just a moment in time, but it totally changed his life trajectory from one of becoming a hunter to one of becoming totally anti-hunting. So in these schools in Finland, for example, they have a huge amount of time outside. It's more outside than inside, even if it's totally freezing. I don't know if it's temperature they have to go inside, but it's minus something. And most of the learning is taking place outside. They live in nature, they learn in nature, they learn more from nature, they learn through nature. And obviously this develops a certain mentality. And even if you see some figures like, the recycling rates around Europe, for example, I mean, recycling is what it is, but you see that the highest percentages are in these countries. In Germany, for example, Malta is very low. We have, the last time I saw it, it's we're I don't know if there are 1 or 2 countries beneath us. I mean, it's a very low percentage compared to 60% plus in Germany, etc., etc. So, these are just percentages, and they don't maybe show everything. It's just a snapshot of what's happening in recycling, but. I think, yes, we can learn a lot from some countries, but we have to pay attention to how to contextualize the learning experience, because the context is totally different. We don't have the trees, we don't have the space, we don't have the water. So obviously it helps them, but we have to find other means. I mean, our trajectory is definitely not going in the right direction, I think.
Thank you. Antoine, yes?
Yeah, just another snippet to what Mark was saying. No, because I think the problem is media. And since I was young, we always had this impression that nothing grows, for example, in Malta. I mean, we usually look at I experience this when I come to garden design, for example. People tend to show us pictures of continental gardens, saying, listen, this is how I want my garden to look like. But very few people understand that we are living in a different climate. Okay, so living in a different climate means you have to look at things differently. Okay, why? Because obviously we have less rain. Okay, so the natural cycles are slightly different from the continent, but very few people realize that on the continent, where you see these lovely gardens, okay, these lovely gardens are photographed in spring. You rarely see photographs of these gardens in winter when everything is dry. Okay, so we have this impression that, as Mark was saying, yes, they have the resources, but the most important thing, I think, is also mentality, and here we have this mentality that, although it's changing slightly, that nothing grows, that we are very dry, we have no trees, where in fact it's not true. We have if you look at the surface area of our island, okay, if you compare that with Britain, we have far more flowering plants here than there are in England, for example. Okay, so it's just an impression, just because we look at images abroad and we compare that with images in summer here.
To add to that, actually, one really nice thing which I learned, I mean, there's a lot of people, I see a lot of names which are from the biology department or have some kind of biology background, which is nice. Through learning biology, I learned a lot about what our habitats are. Like when someone thinks of nature, sometimes they think of forests, unfortunately. Like that's a bit of the colonization effect that Dr. Mifsud mentioned, sort of that we look outside of our island when we think about nature. We don't think about Malta as being like a very biodiverse habitat, but it is, in fact, when you start learning about it and when you start learning about the small patch of soil between two rocks that can contain enough upwards of 10 different species. That's quite fantastic. Like the biomes which exist in such a small island and the kind of unique pockets of land which have very difficult conditions when you think about it. I mean, Malta is dry for most of the year and so much life on it. It's interesting, and it starts to make you understand that we do actually have very beautiful nature pockets. In fact, people come to enjoy them sometimes. We don't realize that, but it's a different kind of nature. It's what can survive in our climate at the end of the day. I mean, if we could grow trees, yes, but realistically in our climate, without like giving them water constantly, the shrubs and the small plants which exist are the ones that can survive, and the ones that most birds, most insects, most small mammals. We actually have had some really nice sightings over the past year of certain mammals, wild mammals, which we haven't been so aware of. Like this, what is it, a ferret? Is it a ferret? I don't want to be mistaken.
Weasel.
I think it's a ferret. It's a weasel? It's a weasel, right? It's a weasel, yes. And also rabbits, actually. We actually have wild rabbits, which I didn't know until last week because someone was talking about a potential, learning more about them. I think it's a matter, I would like to answer a bit Andrew Fairbank's question, because he was talking about the hopelessness which Dr. Mifsud was mentioning, that there is hope, because I know like certain things we're not going to be able to change in time. And that's a bit, deflating most days. And unfortunately, when you start looking at how the system works, it's not rigged very well for the environment, unfortunately. But there are pockets of hope. So in terms of what I would say is what makes people stay optimistic and keep doing what we do is the community you build. You start learning more about the planet. I know it feels overwhelming when you think about it as a big sphere, but we live on a tiny island. Let's just do something about our back gardens, our pockets of soil, our streets, and start from there. It's not as big, I know, like maybe it won't make a big difference, but the fact that we can enjoy and be more in tune with what's around us, I think will help us in the long term. But I think there's some hope. It's okay. I also feel hopeless sometimes. That's why you have to go watch a sunset or a sunrise every now and then and listen to some birds before the cars start to roam around everywhere. You have to wake up early or go to sleep very late.
Very true. Thank you, Sarah. I will put forward another question from Albert, who has been patiently waiting to ask. So Albert, I will unmute you. Good evening.
Hello.
Good evening, Albert.
So
yes, my question is, everyone can read it. Is there a solution to prevent Malta from ending up like Hong Kong? This is an example, with concrete buildings and towers everywhere and insignificant greenery.
who would like to go first?
Anyone who can answer. I mean, this is.
Can I answer a little bit?
I'm really concerned about it,
So I can't answer on any official level on anything. I have no idea. to be honest. But I was at a conference that organized by APS, I believe it was, about sustainability. And there was some interesting architects there that were talking about a very nice plan which they had devised in designing houses houses and apartment blocks which are more efficient and work with our climate system. So there are initiatives which have been taken. I think it's more about the implementation of those and them being taken up, because I was very happy to see. I'm sad every single time I see a building being built, because it doesn't seem that we're building to be sustainable. I understand wanting to have a lot of apartments, and I understand that Malta is small, but we're not building or designing them to be as efficient as I would imagine in this climate. So we'll see. But there are some nice innovative ideas by architecture groups around Malta trying to rethink how we can tackle these issues. It's just a matter of implementation, I guess.
Yes, as I wrote in the chat, you know, I've been to Hong Kong and I really felt claustrophobic. You know? Very tall towers and the landscape, instead of seeing hills and, you know, countryside, you see just tall towers everywhere, you know.
I would imagine you were in the very core of the city, I would say, right? Very
I know there are parks, but, you know, going through the streets and the roads, you know, it really offends. You feel claustrophobic and offends the eye, you know. It's really, I hope it doesn't turn up like Malta like that eventually, these high-rise towers everywhere, you know.
Yeah.
And that's why they managed to have such a large population in a relatively small area, you know, because they cram people in these large, tall towers everywhere, you know. And in the streets, you rarely see any trees or anything, you know, in the main streets. And then, there are, of course, they have nice parks and bird parks and everything. But I hope we don't end that way, you know, to solve the population problem and so on and so forth.
I don't know. Yeah, we'll see.
Antoine?
Well, there you go. No, contrary to what Sarah was saying, I do not understand this craze for increasing the population, because the less people you have, the less infrastructure you need and the less expenses you would require. With regards to the question about what could one do to reduce the impact of what is happening, I think the only or one of the few things that one should do is increase his voice, let his voice be heard. You know, if people do not speak out, if people do not talk about the problems that we are encountering, the policymakers will not move, will not change the system, for sure, because there is money involved. And when you start looking at money before you look at health, before you look at well-being, then this is what you get. Okay. So I think those are the two important things. But unless people start speaking up, you know, nothing will happen. It will take time. And this is all about, again, all about social justice. You know, for as long as I've lived, I've seen, I live in Slima, and I've seen Slima change drastically, okay, over the years. And personally, to be honest, I could be living in, I don't know, Monaco, or I could be living in any other country, because there is no connection between me and my surroundings. And that is very sad, because one's surroundings is very important for his well-being. Okay, when you experience, and this ties up with what we were saying before with children and their experience of life when they are young. When you go around and you experience your environment, okay, those experiences will become part of your life. Okay, so if change is so big that you cannot relate to your surroundings when you grow up, there is something wrong with the planning system. Okay, and the only way to beat that is to voice your concern, practically.
Yes, Mark? You're muted.
Yeah, all right. Well, I agree with Antoine. I think that, you know, we don't need to increase our population even more. We're already one of the most highly populated places on our planet, you know, and more people means more take up of land, more infrastructure, more electricity use. I mean, there's nothing wrong with people, but but carrying capacity of the Maltese Islands is what it is. We cannot just continue putting people here just for the sake of building more flats, etc., etc. And secondly, does it make sense to build more flats? You know, we're destroying what makes Malta architecturally beautiful. I mean, all these townhouses are just going down, and you know, we're not even reusing most of the stones. We're just dumping them somewhere, and we're losing the skyline, which was something which makes Malta, in my opinion, very unique and a special place. And these are important visual aspects, you know, that you see the church, and then there are two-story buildings, and now we have what a lot of people are calling the uglification of the Maltese Islands. And, you know, if it continues in this way, I don't know if a lot of people will actually be interested in staying here. You know, and does it make sense to build all these flats? I mean, obviously it's a question of greed, in the sense that a lot of people, or a few contractors, actually making a huge amount of money and buying their supercars and buying all that stuff. And but are the Maltese people living more? Are they having a better quality of life with all these flats coming up? Is the average citizen getting a better quality of life with all this, or is just, you know, a huge amount of money for a couple of people, and all the rest have to, you know, increase their pollution, increase noise, reduced area for taking your kids out to a park or somewhere, you know? So with so many now, that I just took my kids down to the seaside a couple of hours before we came online, and you know, I came back because there was no place. There was no place here in Marsa Scala, and there was no place on the rocky seashore to just stay there and look at the sea or swim with your kids. It was totally full up, you know? So, I mean, there are limits, and we have to recognize this, but I think greed has no limit. And I think that is one of the main issues, because after all, agricultural land without a permit has no value when compared to a land which can be developed into 10 stories. And if it can be developed into even more stories, that land has even more value. So we have a problem that agricultural land, in the perception of a lot of people, including policymakers, has no value. So obviously, before each and every election, people will go and probably, you know, pull the strings of certain politicians in order to increase the ODZ areas and include increase the in-scheme areas and include ODZ areas in order to be able to build. And, you know, with the signing of a simple paper, a plot of land that was agricultural, you know, instantly becomes developable. And obviously that's good for politicians, unfortunately, because it means that a lot of people will gain work. You know, the electrician will have thousands of flats to work on, and the dawli kahluwa, the ones that plaster, and the builders and the contractors, etc., etc. So unfortunately, because we are led by money rather than by quality of life, at least some are. That will always create problems, in the sense that we value money more than we value quality of life. I'm not generalizing. I'm saying we, yes, but some people do. Okay.
Definitely. Thank you, Mark. Sarah?
Yeah, to continue with both of them, what Mark and Antoine were saying, one issue we have is that a large portion of our economy is based on construction and tourism. So when talking about overpopulation, we have to look at tourism in that in a certain season, literally our population almost doubles, like in the amount of people that come in and go. It's a strain on resources, it's a strain on, you can't even enjoy your own environment. You can't go to the beach and have a quiet time, there's just too many people there. But also construction is a big part of our economy too. It employs a lot of people in right or bad ways. But as they were mentioning, like it concentrates a lot of our own kind of money at the top. And lots of people are making money from apartments, not because that we need them or because there's a certain amount of population demand for them, but it literally makes more money to develop a piece of land than to just leave it there. And even like we're now seeing a shift, like recent policies have seen a shift in what is considered a conservation area in old towns. So that idea that Mark was mentioning, the shifting of the landscape. Old towns and villages like in the south, etc., you have a certain area around the town, the church, which could not be developed to a certain extent, or could not, you couldn't change the facade, you couldn't do certain things. That line has shrunk. So now the encroachment of development is seen much more. So in areas like Abba and Rendi, where before around the church at least there was not a certain level of development. Before it was 2 floors, 2 stories, now it's 5 stories. Like that is changing a lot of the way we see our life. So we need to prevent this from happening to Malta as there is in Hong Kong. It needs to be a change in economy too. It needs to be how the government values our own land and our people's well-being, essentially.
That's very true. Thank you, Sarah. So I will go forward to the next question. Sarah Galea, because you answered it already, we'll put it forward to Sarah Gosher. So this is by Andrew, who asks, do you think there is room for more optimism in sustainability communication?
I think more than optimism, it's more how to engage, like how to teach someone, okay, like you're frustrated with the situation, but it's not just about showing you good examples, like, you know, in India they're doing this, in Canada they're doing this. It's also about like locally, how can you engage, as Antoine mentioned, like how can you become an active citizen? How can you make your voice be heard? How can you show disapproval with something? Get to know certain laws. I think that's what we need to focus on. It's about educating the people with a tool, with tools necessary to fight the situation we're in, essentially.
Definitely. Antoine and Mark, do you have anything to add to this question? Okay. Sarah Galea, do you have anything else to add?
I think I mentioned most of what I had to say.
Yes.
Yeah, it's not that straightforward, but I think there is room. And one other optimistic thing about talking about these things is that the fact that you are more aware of how you have an impact on this planet and how everything is connected makes you appreciate them more, I think. So yes, it sometimes feels a bit hopeless, but also from a day to day. Like in my case, I've seen people. I've stopped talking to people a lot about these things, and usually, like at work, it has become more of a what do you call it? Lead by example sort of thing. I'm not talking about sustainability in bigger sphere. I'm talking about daily practices. So like learning by doing. I'll do something and people start to notice it, and they'll be like, "Hey, Estra, you never bring you never take one of the cups." So when we offer them during a party, and they're like, "Ah, I see," and so like this, the conversation starts to happen. But and those kind of discussions are less sort of about judging, and you know, you feel less sort of, because people feel attacked sometimes. They feel like they have certain comforts, they don't want to give them up, and you don't. And whenever someone starts talking about being more sustainable, they feel attacked that they're going to have to give up these luxuries and things. But I think it has to be bigger than that. So there is room for hope and optimism. At least that's how I look at it, but we'll see.
Definitely.
Sorry, I was muted. I muted myself and I was talking for nothing. Well, honestly, sometimes I feel we're on the Titanic after it has already hit the iceberg. But you know, we can't give up. You know, we can't give up. It's not easy at all, because it's like going against the grain. It's not easy at all. You know, I think that, for example, COVID made us realize that the world as we know can change. And maybe, obviously there was what I call a carrot and stick approach, in the sense that, you know, a lot of people stayed inside and, you know, obeyed the rules because, you know, there was a fine, and some of the fines were, I don't know, 4,000 if I remember correctly, or 10,000 or something. I had to stay inside because I had a member of my family who was in contact with someone at his workplace with a COVID individual, and the police were coming, you know, randomly. I think they came twice in these 14 days to check if we're all in there. And if we're not there, well, they would have given us a fine. So unfortunately, that's a carrot and stick approach. If there was no fine, a lot of people wouldn't have stayed inside. Because what we need is not a carrot and stick approach. You know, what we need is education. That's what I believe in the sense that, you know these speed cameras, and they have a 60 km/h speed limit. You know, a lot of people, what they do is when they're approaching the speed camera, they slow down. And then when they are away from the speed camera, you know, and they don't really care if they're being a danger to other drivers, if they can kill someone, etc., etc. That's because it's a carrot and stick approach. It works in the short term. It works in the short term if you give fines, etc., etc. But you're not really educating the public. So if there is a little bit of optimism, I would say my optimism is that we should improve totally our educational system and make a way, in the sense that, you know, children, etc., and youth start understanding that they need to change because they want to, not because they have to. And that's totally different, you know. I mean, fines make you change because you have to, rather than because you want to, and that is not long-term at all. We want long-term change, and long-term change, in my opinion, is only possible through education. The stick and carrot and stick approach is basically it's legislation, obviously, and it's important, but it's something which is short-term. Once you remove the fines, people will do whatever they want. I mean, we can see this through COVID now. Not everyone knows if you should wear masks in the markets or not. And if there are no fines and you'll just be told, you know, we should wear a mask, well, a lot of people don't bother because there was no educational background for that. It was mainly fines and laws, etc., etc. I mean, there's nothing wrong with that, but it's short term. We need something more long term for us to be perhaps more optimistic, etc., etc.
Yes, definitely. Danielle, I see you raise your hand. Is that on purpose? Antoine, yes.
I did, just something on what Mark was saying. I mean, I agree with him with regards to education, but I think it has to work on both levels. You have to have education for the long term, and you have to have legislation for until you get to your aim in the long term. Because people are not disciplined. I mean, if we look at Malta, people are not disciplined at all, you know, or a lot of people are not disciplined. So somehow you have to, you know, restrain them. And I mean, with sustainability, with practices which are good practices, that's how it has to work. For sure, I totally agree. I mean, I'm an educator. Education is very important. It should start with at a very young age, even preschool. All right. But I think enforcement is just as important, but in the short term.
Thank you, Antoine. Now I'll go to the last question, which is put forward by Ian. And it's a very interesting one. He says, about environmental education, in Germany, hunters are the people with the most knowledge about nature. And in order to get a hunting license, you must learn a lot about animals, plants, seasons, breeding cycles, and much more. So it's no wonder that most people who like nature and like to be outside choose to get a hunting license. His question is this: is sustainability more about understanding nature and change in a lasting way, or is it about leaving nature alone and stop hunting and so on entirely? Who would like to answer this question? Sarah.
I think without knowing what you're impacting, you can't really elevate the impact. So you can't stop hunting unless you know that there's an impact of hunting. You wouldn't stop the bad practices if you didn't know the harmful impact it has. So maybe
definitely.
Like in the whole run, yeah, if you want to safeguard a specific environment, you would ideally leave it alone and leave it to its own devices to what extent you can, because depending on like how degraded it is. But you cannot do that without knowing what the issues are.
Well, of course. Mark?
Well, I have to be a little bit blunt here, you know, in the sense that, well, I'm a Christian, but what makes me a Christian? Is it because I know the Bible by heart, or because I practice Christianity? And sustainability is not about knowledge, it's about what you do. It's not what you know. I'm not saying that knowledge is not good, but basically, you know, you can be a perfect, you can know the Bible by heart, you can quote from the Bible, even the devil quotes from the Bible, and then totally live in a totally opposite manner than being a Christian. So knowledge and behavior, as I said in my first slide, are not related at all. In fact, in most studies, knowledge leads to pro-environmental attitudes. It can do that, but there is no link in most, I'm not going to say 90%, but in most of the studies all around the world, there is no direct link between increased knowledge and increased positive environmental behavior. So you can know a lot about the environment, yes, but it doesn't mean that you act pro-environmentally, you know. And it's the same. That's why I was trying to put the analogy with religion, in the sense that I can know the Bible from the first page to the last page, but then be an atheist. Well, you know, so.
Definitely. Antoine?
Yeah, to a certain extent, I agree with Mark, but I have to disagree as well, because obviously you cannot not know something and act upon it. So I think when it comes to urban sustainability, for example, the issue is the fact that we are constructing everywhere, not being aware of the problems we're causing because we are distorting the natural cycles. Okay, so the thing is, unless people are aware, and I look at my architecture students, you know, and what I tell them is, if you are not aware of the impact you're doing because of your doing, okay, then you're going to mess things up. So if we're concreting everywhere, if we're putting asphalt everywhere, not knowing that our impact is having a negative effect on the water cycle, then I keep on doing what I'm doing. And that is what we were seeing, you know, day in, day out. So whereas Mark is right, knowing something doesn't mean that you're doing things right, okay? But you have to have knowledge to actually do things right, or rather do things the right way.
Oh, definitely. Thank you, Antoine. Sarah, the floor is yours.
So Ian always asks some provoking questions. I like that. Nice to see that he's here. I think it's a mixture, as in both Dr. Mifsud, both Sarah and both Antoine, and all of you guys have mentioned different aspects to this, but it's a mixture. I think I don't agree with both extremes, like saying, so Ian mentioned sort of sustainability, understanding nature and changing it in a lasting way. I don't think will have a positive effect in itself, because nature has been around more than humans have, and it has its own way of its own cycles and its own way of dealing with everything on this planet, more than we have figured out yet. And leaving it alone completely, I don't think humans know how to do that. So I think it's a mixture. I think the knowledge we have needs to be used more successfully and needs to be looked at more holistically and thinking about the different aspects of it. I know I was very lucky to start the master's that Dr. Mifsud teaches in. So there's a master's at university about education for sustainable development. And I was also shocked that knowledge does not actually get to the point of action. So a lot of people who have so much knowledge about what makes a sustainable lifestyle don't actually implement that in their livelihood. And I also remember learning a lot more about how having these emotional connections. So I think it's a mixture of both. You need to know about the planet you live on and actually learn from the past. Because I think a big thing that has been happening is sort of, we keep repeating the same things. We keep saying we will do better, and we keep saying, because, you know, things change and it's okay, you know. But I think it's just a decision that has to be taken that we're going to do better, not just say that we will. And we have all the information we need to know about how important it is to have natural environments for our mental health. We have all the data we need to know that, you know, having certain chemicals in our water might be doing something to our health, which we might find out too late for ourselves to do something about. We know that air being polluted has had effects on our health. I think it's a matter of actually, you know, there's so many things working against it, but it's actually deciding that these are a big priority in our life, and we need to make sure that a planet we live on is one that we will enjoy living on. And but it's not that easy. I think being a hunter is not such a... I have a bit of a different opinion after talking to a lot of people about hunting. I think in Malta, hunting gets a very bad rep. And I agree, I don't like hunting, I don't want hunting to happen, but I also understand that hunting happening in Malta is not actually affecting as much as Europe likes to call us out on, because there are other countries around the world which also receive some of the birds that pass over Malta, and their flights, they die not here, but they die somewhere else, which we don't have control over. But anyway, that's for another discussion for another day. And I like talking to hunters. I don't agree with how they look at certain things, yes, but it's always an interesting conversation because their knowledge about Malta is quite good. At least some of them are very knowledgeable about the trees that birds like to come and eat from. I know that that's not a good thing sometimes because they want to maybe shoot them, but anyway. But they have certain knowledge which not many of us actually have, even if you studied biology and chemistry at university. Like personally, I didn't take such a botanical route, so I did not learn a lot about certain names in Maltese that we have for our plants and what you're used to seeing around you. So I think it has to be a joint effort. It has to be a conversation we have. I think there's lots of knowledge pockets around Malta which needs to start to be shared more.
That's definitely true, Sarah. So, yes.
Yes. Coincidentally, before it was mentioned about Christianity to how being a good Christian. I don't think if you're aware that recently even the Pope issued an encyclical, Laudato Si. It was about the environment. So sort of he described it as a new modern sin. We are not good stewards of the earth. So this is another responsibility for true practicing Catholics and Christians, of course. Just a small note.
Mm-hmm. Yes, definitely. And as Christians, you know, one principle is that you take care of the earth that you're living on. So that rings very true for today. So, if anyone else would not like to add anything, I think we can wrap up over here. Any last additions before? All right, so this concludes the first ever virtual Malta Cafe Sai. Yes, hand raised. Antoine?
No, sorry.
Oh.
I think that's a clap. That's a clap. That's Danielle clapping at us.
Oh my goodness. I'm quite daft. So I'm very happy by how this went, and thank you all for coming. I would like to thank the speakers. We have Mark, Sarah, Galea, and Antoine. I would also like to thank Danielle for her great help, Chris and Edward. And finally, last but not least, you know, you for coming and making this all such an amazing experience. And of course, the Malta Chamber of Scientists, without whom this event couldn't have happened at all, for sure. Danielle, would you like to add something?
First of all, well done, Amik. I think you did a brilliant job. And I reiterate, I really hope that a lot of people will fill in your questionnaire because I know how important that is for your research and research in general. But it's important to voice our opinions, of course, through survey as well. So I would like to thank everyone. Thank you, Amik, and thank all the panel speakers. It was such an interesting discussion, and sustainability is such a multifaceted approach. There are different aspects that are connected to each other, that there is no one solution. Like everything in life, life is not as straightforward as we'd like it to be, but it also makes it beautiful and interesting at the same time. So well done to all, and thank you all for joining. And one final thing, hopefully we'll get to see you back in October when we start having our physical events again. But if not, hopefully you enjoyed this online session, and we will continue online sessions if, unfortunately, COVID will come back to haunt us again. I realized that there was a final comment by, let me see, Andrea Francesca Galea, about how can we combat such an empathetic attitude when most people believe unless I can gain something from this myself, why should I do anything about it? Example also, as with the case of hunters, they have the knowledge but may not exactly adhere to the sustainable part of hunting. I think this is kind of something that we can also discuss even offline, even on our Facebook page as well. We do have our Facebook page, and if you'd like to join our mailing list, we also have a mailing list. Just let us know and we'll add your email address as well. But this is something that we can take home with us today. Very, very important topic on sustainability, and it does affect our everyday life, but also our future generations. So whatever belief you have, the earth is extremely important. So thank you all once again, and good night, and thank you.